Ukrainian forces continue their preparations for a major counterattack. Russian forces are trying to strengthen the defense line on the peninsula in case the Ukrainian army attacks Crimea. Ukrainian forces have accelerated their attacks on Crimea. Recently, a massive explosion occurred near Simferopol, a crucial point for Russian forces. Different claims were made from both sides about the details of this explosion. Russian forces used a land bridge connecting Crimea and the Russian mainland to carry out large-scale military shipments to the region. The railway line from the Soviet Union on this land bridge is the most important vehicle used by the Russian forces to deliver ammunition to the region. Ukrainian forces carried out intermittent attacks on the railway line in Crimea while Russian forces were carrying out ammunition shipments and tried to prevent Russian forces from strengthening their military elements in the Crimean Peninsula. It is estimated that the important caliber cruise missiles for the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which the Russian forces supplied to the region, were targeted in the explosion that took place the other day. The Kremlin said the explosion caused a freight train carrying grain to derail in Simferopol, closing the only connection with the Sevastopol seaport where the Russian Black Sea Fleet is stationed. The railway administration reported that the explosion occurred as a result of third-party intervention, namely sabotage. The Kremlin government stated that Russia repaired the railway line very quickly, but the incident caused a delay in supply, potentially preventing the delivery of caliber cruise missiles to the Black Sea Fleet. According to a report from British intelligence, this incident caused great concern in the Kremlin about Russia's inability to defend important infrastructure on the peninsula. British intelligence cautioned that while the peninsula maintains a vital psychological and logistical role in enabling Russia's war in Ukraine, any sabotage in this sensitive area will further raise concerns about the Kremlin's ability to protect other important infrastructure in Crimea. In addition to the explosion that took place near Simferopol, there were hot moments in the Jiangxi region, which is on the attack route of Ukraine. The Jiangxi region is one of the strategically important logistics points of the Russian forces in Crimea. Solono Zero train station located in Jiangxi is the first stop of the military munitions dispatched by the Russian forces to Crimea. The Russian-backed head of the city of Jiangxi stated that the area was attacked by drones. Ukraine confirmed the explosions in Jiangxi. However, they did not openly admit that they were normally behind the attack. Russia has faced attacks in Crimea before, but in most cases responsibility was either denied by Ukraine or blamed for some form of partisan sabotage. This attack, confirmed or not, indicates the increased capacity of the Ukrainian Air Force to deploy unmanned aerial vehicles. Until now, Crimea appeared largely out of range of Ukrainian missiles, but this attack proved that a drone can at least go deeper than thought behind Russian lines. Ukrainian defense intelligence made serious inferences regarding the details of this explosion. Ukrainian defense intelligence emphasized that mysterious explosions in Jiangxi destroyed Russian caliber cruise missiles, which have been widely used in attacks on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure in recent months. Caliber missiles were used by Russia's Black Sea Fleet. According to information received from Jiangxi residents, most of Jiangxi was without power for more than 30 minutes during these drone attacks. Explosions in Crimea accelerated Russia's disarmament process, and the latest situations in the peninsula also pointed out that Ukraine's preparations for deoccupation of Crimea are continuing. Sergei Aksyonov, Russia's top official in occupied Crimea, stated that the air defense near Jiangxi has been activated and the situation is under control. Aksyonov claimed that the Ukrainian forces were in the propaganda effort and emphasized to the residents that they should not rely on fake news in the past period. The Ukrainian forces made a number of attacks to weaken Crimea. Ukrainian forces targeted an ammunition depot near Jiangxi. Weeks later, Russia accused Ukraine of carrying out a drone attack on the Black Sea Fleet in the Crimean port city of Sevastopol, in which a warship was damaged. This latest attack indicates that Kiev is determined to continue to strain the supply chains of Russian forces, specifically targeting its stock of missiles, as well as the routes through which they can be transported via Crimea to occupied southern Ukraine. Speaking on Ukrainian television, military spokesperson Natalia Humeniuk reminded the audience that Zdankoy is a central station for the occupying force and that it was clearly stated that from the beginning of the Russian total invasion, defeating their logistics would play a major role. Zdankoy plays an important role in the future status of Crimea. The attacks carried out by the Ukrainian forces in the important points of Crimea seriously worry the soldiers in the Russian army and the Russians in Crimea, disrupting the defense of Crimea while the Russian forces turned all their focus on eastern Ukraine is a major strategic mistake. This mistake could even cause the Kremlin to lose Crimea, which it illegally annexed while seeking more. Kiev also has a political reason to keep Crimea in the news. Ukraine's current goal is to remove Russian forces not only from areas seized since February last year but also from the Black Sea Peninsula, which was illegally annexed in 2014. In addition, the United States will greatly increase the intelligence it provides to Ukrainian forces so they can target Russian troops in occupied Donbass and Crimea. Additional intelligence will be provided as part of expanding U.S. military support, which includes an $800 million new weapons package, including artillery, armored personnel carriers, and helicopters to help the armed forces contain an imminent Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine. The decision to share additional intelligence and provide heavy weapons marks a different era in the clash's approach of the Biden administration. A U.S. intelligence official noted that as the conflict develops, they continue to adapt so that operators can flexibly share detailed and timely intelligence with Ukrainians. The United States' influx of intelligence caused the Russian forces to change their strategy. They are concentrated in Moscow, eastern Ukraine. U.S. intelligence will help Ukraine better determine how the Russian military plans to attack, allowing the Ukrainians to respond with artillery, drone strikes, and other weapons. However, U.S. intelligence will also play an important role in the Crimean attacks by Ukrainian forces, thanks to U.S. intelligence. The Ukrainian forces will closely monitor the movements of the Russian troops in Crimea, preventing the Russians from repelling the Ukrainian attacks. Despite providing heavy weapons and intelligence to the Ukrainian army in the new era, the Biden administration is still hesitant to supply fighter jets. The White House may fear that the dispatch of fighter jets could be an excuse for Russia to designate Washington as a belligerent party in the conflict. However, with the ever-growing U.S. aid, we may see that the warplanes are sent to Ukraine in the following days, for Russia now openly threatens to endanger the entire world order. Although the Ukraine war has completed 1 year, it still continues to affect the whole world. This war, which entered the pages of history as the toughest war of the 21st century, has divided the world into two, even though it seems to be between two countries. On the one hand, Ukraine and NATO, and on the other hand, Russia and some Eastern European and Asian countries that support it in line with Russia's policies. Although Russia's war efforts have been hit hard by Western countries, economic sanctions against Russia and restrictions on countries that want to circumvent these sanctions, it is an undeniable fact that Russia still has great power. Russia's policies not only in Eastern Europe but also in the world's seas pushed the USA to take various measures. While the Russian Navy is making various moves in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, the U.S. Navy is alarmed. Let's now observe the activity of the U.S. and Russian navies on the U.S. coasts and in the world's seas. After World War II, powerful countries led by the USA and Soviet Russia entered the nuclear arms race. This arms race was continued not only as a nuclear power but also as a land, air, and sea power. Nuclear power inherited from Soviet Russia to the present day, Russian Federation has become a major deterrent in the world's last 80 years. Despite this, the USA and other NATO countries are aware that this deterrence of Russia is just a bluff, but they still take precautions. Seeing Russian submarines off the US coast and alerting the US Navy can be the best example of this. Russia maintains its maritime presence not only in the Black Sea, but also in the Baltic and Arctic seas very actively. Although it is blockaded by the NATO Navy in the Baltic Sea, it can sail to the oceans through the Arctic Ocean and the Bering Strait. Even if this opening is made with submarines, the fact that these submarines carry nuclear-tipped missiles is enough to push the Western world to take precautions. US commanders and military observers are reportedly on alert about Russian submarine fleet activities off the coast of the USA. According to officials, Russian submarines have been seen more frequently in the Mediterranean and near the US coastlines in recent weeks. This was perceived as an effort to maintain a presence in international waters, as well as Russia's preoccupation with the Ukraine war and subsequent buildup of Russian forces and nuclear submarines in the Black Sea. There are indications that nuclear-powered submarines are deployed off the coast of the US, in the Mediterranean, and elsewhere in Europe. This is why Russian deployments resemble Soviet-style submarine tactics during the Cold War. This becomes more apparent in light of the announcement made by Russian President Vladimir Putin while overseeing the commissioning of several ships, including the ballistic missile-launching Generalissimus Suvorov nuclear-powered submarine. Putin said his country would build more nuclear-powered submarines, ensuring Russia's security for decades to come. This is in line with the assessment that Russia continues to expand its nuclear submarine fleet. According to military experts, the exact scale of Russian nuclear submarine deployment remains unclear, but it is certainly seen a massive increase over the past 2 decades. Russia continues to increase its submarine capability and is conducting tests with the nuclear-capable Belgorod submarine capable of launching underwater unmanned vehicles. Reports last month showed that Belgorod had completed a series of tests of the Poseidon torpedo model touted as a superweapon. So what kind of measures is the USA taking against the Russian presence? An alarm was also raised by the US Northern Command and the director of NORAD, the U.S. Air Force. The U.S. Northern Command also warned that Russia poses the greatest threat to the nation. They carried the Severodvinsk submarines, the first of the submarines to the Pacific. Another Severodvinsk is currently in the Mediterranean and is moving towards the Atlantic. This would be a persistent, imminent threat that could carry many ground attack cruise missiles that could threaten the United States. A few months ago, it was claimed that the forces of the Russian Navy were reinforced in the Mediterranean. This may be important given the strategic importance of the region in U.S. calculations. In addition, the USA is trying to strengthen its presence in the Mediterranean. In addition, the command of the Naval Intelligence Office underlined the risk posed by Russia's Severodvinsk SS Jeepneys, or Yasin class as it is popularly known. These submarines are very, very advanced, capable of multitasking, and are becoming more and more active. There are also Russian submarines in the Pacific and Atlantic. It was stated that these submarines began to patrol the Atlantic and endangered the United States in certain areas. For this reason, it was also underlined that following these submarines in their actions would be a biplane issue for the United States. Recently, Russian officials claimed that he was apparently preparing plans to strike and neutralize Russia out of fear that the United States might lose its global dominance. To combat this potential threat, it has been suggested that Moscow could develop a new military strategy using nuclear weapons to deter potential aggression. Ever since Russia began fighting Ukraine, the use of nuclear weapons has become a recurring debate, and the nuclear threat has never been completely off the table. Russia continues to launch its nuclear submarines to the far seas despite a full-blown war being fought near its home. Current deployments worry the Pentagon, although military observers believe that the Ukrainian war will slow the formidable Russian Navy for several years. So what steps is Russia taking to further increase its naval power? The Russian Navy has the most diverse submarine fleets in the world. Moscow says that as an important component of its strategic deterrence, some of these submarines are capable of launching ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the country has worked relentlessly to upgrade its submarine forces, especially in recent years. Moscow has developed a large number of submarines that can achieve the most strategic targets in the USA and continental Europe. Russia is one of the few most powerful states in the world, especially as on naval power, and we can see this clearly in the Ukraine war. Although Russia's attacks from the Black Sea Fleet have decreased now due to the shortage of ammunition and the loss of ships due to the attacks of the Ukrainian Army, the attacks of the Russian Black Sea Fleet at the beginning of the war were quite difficult for the Ukrainian Army, with an estimated 58 ships. The Russian Navy manages one of the largest submarine fleets in the world. However, these ships can be deployed worldwide, causing U.S. commanders to be alarmed and the Russian Navy challenging the influence of the U.S. Navy. Russian President Vladimir Putin oversaw the commissioning of several new warships and a nuclear-powered submarine while promising to further strengthen the Russian Navy. This outburst of Putin also found wide coverage in the Russian media. Putin, who has largely avoided public relations since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, gave the green light to the hoisting of Russian flags on new ships via video link. The newly commissioned ships included a corvette, a minesweeper, and the nuclear-powered Generalissimus Suvorov submarine capable of launching ballistic missiles. Another nuclear submarine, Emperor Alexander II, launched last week and will enter service after trials. We will increase the speed and volume of construction of various ships. We will equip them with the most modern weapons, the Russian leader said in his statements through the media. These steps of Putin are taken to reliably ensure the security of Russia and the protection of its national interests in the world's oceans. During his 2 decades in power, Putin has made strengthening its armed forces a top priority by equipping the Navy with new warships and adding hypersonic missiles, which Putin describes as invincible to Russia's arsenal. But Russia has faced a series of failures on the battlefield in Ukraine, which has proven to be a formidable competitor, largely thanks to the shipment of modern weapons it has received from the West to resist in its war with Russia. Russia's active appearance in the games and the fact that it has lost superiority in the Ukraine war, on the other hand, confronts us as a great dilemma, considering the fact that the Russian Navy is equipped with nuclear warheads. It is an undeniable fact that it is a great deterrent, but it should not be forgotten that the NATO Navy also has nuclear power and has more elements than the Russian Navy. As the Ukraine war evolves into a second Cold War between Russia and NATO, we will see together how the two sides will move and how the war will be shaped according to these moves. The most intense fights continue to take place in Sudan today. The front line here, Ivan Dowd and the Ukrainians establish their next defense line along the railways. This new defense line leverages the local geography and creates a series of natural obstacles that are expected to slow down the pace of Russian advancement. Nonetheless, this defense line is not perfect, and here is why. Last time I told you that the Ukrainians have retreated from the central part of Solidarity to the west in order to escape the imminent encirclement. The encirclement was imminent because after the fall of Yakovlevka, the Russians gained access to the local heights and, despite the Ukrainians' efforts, gradually expanded it around Solidarity. I also told you that I do not expect the Ukrainians to hold the second salt mine area for too long because it is very hard to deliver supplies. There are as many segments of the roads leading to this industrial area are under Russian fire control. Today, the Ukrainians stepped back to the third salt mine area, supporting my analysis. The evidence of the further retreat served off footage posted by the Wagner forces, where they have been walking through the streets slightly to the north of the salt mines. The main Ukrainian defense line right now goes through the city station and the third salt mine. Many Russian sources are saying that the Ukrainians are preparing a massive counterattack. For example, some say that the Ukrainians are deploying their strategic reserve in order to conduct a counterattack from the north of Soledar. Other sources say that the Ukrainians have already conducted a counterattack today and it was from the south. In this supposed counterattack, the Ukrainians deployed combined units of several air mobile brigades and tried to attack from Paraskovia. But Russian Air Force allegedly detected and destroyed hundreds of Ukrainian troops and all out of Western armored vehicles. However, this is completely inconsistent with the changes that we can observe on the ground. If the Ukrainians plan to return control over the central part of the region, why would they simultaneously retreat from the second salt mine area? This industrial zone would be an essential object that would be leveraged by the Ukrainian forces. For this reason, I do not think that the Ukrainians have tried to break into the central part of Solidarity or that they are even preparing to do it. It is true that the concentration of the Ukrainian forces to the north of Solidarity has increased, but the reasons are different. Apart from holding the last two positions in Soledar, which are the salt mine and seal station, the Ukrainians are trying to build their defense line along the railways. There are advantages and disadvantages to holding this line. On the one hand, the Ukrainians are stopping the front line from the collapse, which means that the Russians still have to fight for each and every defensive position and nothing is given away for free. The Ukrainians established their positions along the railway embankment, and embankments proved to be a significant impediment in this war. The settlements are also not too sparse located, which allows having more covered positions and small warehouses with ammunition and supplies. On the other hand, the Russians are still controlling the heights, which allows them to have all out of supply roads under fire control. In general, this defense line serves as a great impediment on the technical level, although it gives no significant advantages on the tactical level. As of now, the Russians are preparing to attack Krasnohorivka and Paraskovia. They reportedly got very close to the settlements, allowing them to establish direct fire control over some segments of the important supply roads. Some sources also say that the Russians deployed their airborne forces for these specific tasks, not the Wagners. The Russians previously were not able to advance on Krasnohora from the east, which is why they focused more on the Horodnya. But now, with the Horodnya under their control, the Russians have launched several reconnaissance groups to the south of Krasnohorivka. Overall, the battle for Soledar has almost ended. The Ukrainians gradually retreated to the next defense line and did not allow the front line to collapse. Russian forces will likely continue storming this illustration and salt mine with the same intensity, but unlikely for too long because these positions are quite detached from the city and do not allow the block-by-block advancement while being under cover of the surrounding buildings. Hopefully we will see stabilization of the front line in the next several days.